Hello, and welcome back to Crit and Crit. I'm Scint,
I'm Axion.
and we are continuing our discussion of Hogfather while we play through Pokemon Christmas. So, we spent the past couple episodes with just what you need to know to even begin to understand how bananas this plot is. So let's go talk about how bananas the plot is.
So, Hogfather begins on Hogwatch Night, which is the Discworld equivalent of Christmas Eve, with Susan sto-helit, the granddaughter of Death, but more importantly, and more emphatically in her current situation, the governess of a couple of young children. Susan has wanted to live a quote-unquote normal life. And, things, as the story is wont to do, are conspiring to not allow her to live a normal life. At the same time, someone is going about doing the duties of what, at first glance, would be the duties of Santa Claus. We find out fairly quickly that this is Death and his manservant Albert, who, for some reason, are not doing the usual job of Death and reaping souls, or at least not doing only that, but are instead running about in the Hogfather's sleigh, pulled by the Hogfather's pigs, delivering presents, answering gift requests, and drinking all the sherry. Have I missed anything so far?
Yes, because we do remember that there's also the plot with the assassins that we've been introduced to.
Yes, yeah. Go ahead.
So, at the Assassin's Guild, and as we have mentioned, they are a very respectable organization who, as long as you pay enough, will make sure that they take care of somebody as an art form. And they have been hired by very, very mysterious people who do not see it necessary to give their identities, because I believe the justification is 3 million gold can buy a lot of no questions.
Yes.
So, but we however know that these people are the auditors of reality, and they would like the assassins to take out the Fat Man. And Lord Downey, the leader of the Assassin's Guild, has just the person for the job. The weird one among them, Mr. Tea Time.
It's pronounced Tia Time.
I don't get it. But yes, Tea Time. You can correct me as many times as you want, I'm still saying Tea Time.
No, it's fine. I was only going to do it the once because it's kind of
in character.
A running
yes.
gag, yeah.
Yes. Anyway, he apparently has made a hobby of figuring out how he's going to take out basically everyone and everything, up to and including the Fat Man, Tooth Fairies, any other holiday, theoretically fictional mythical being. So he sets off and decides to do this. And to underscore what kind of person Tea Time is, Downey does mention, we took him in when he was orphaned at a young age, and we probably should have looked more closely at that in hindsight. So, with an assassin who thinks he has the perfect plan to kill the Fat Man, we then find out that there's weirdness going on with the Fat Man's usual holiday activities.
So, this is the situation that the story begins in. We have an assassin, a very, very eccentric assassin, gathering up a team for the purposes of assassinating the Hogfather. We have Death and Albert running around doing the Hogfather's job, and we have Susan just wanting to be normal and be left alone. We also see a little bit of Susan's particular style of childcare, which involves threatening so-called imaginary monsters with a poker. And I mean, you can do a lot worse than having every boogeyman and basement monster and anything else you might encounter being terrified of your caretaker because she will beat them senseless with a blunt object.
I do like that her employers find this a good idea because they think it's just playing along with the kids to get them to go back to sleep. Like, no, she's actually beating the crap out of these things with a poker. And the kids now believe firmly in the poker can kill monsters. And this is all well and good until the Hogfather comes to the employer's house. And Susan happens to be there. And Susan knows a skeleton in a Santa suit with poor padding when she sees it.
And it's because she can see it. Because we find out that one of the ways that death works in this world, and this is mentioned in some other books to some degree, is that most people see what they expect to see, and they're not supposed to see Death with his scythe, a giant talking skeleton just walking around. But Susan can see things that are actually there. And in part, this is because of her particularly unusual and unique ancestry and heritage and her connection to death. But it's also because Susan is a practical person who can see things as they are, and does not have many illusions about the nature of the world. And in Discworld, this is something that is relatively rare. The other people who tend to see things that are actually there are wizards. And I believe the story jumps over to the wizards shortly after Death has his encounter with Susan, where she tells him in no uncertain purposes to buzz off, while being very confused about why all of this is happening. The wizards have discovered a sealed room in the Unseen University. And Arch-Chancellor Ridcully wants to see what's inside. Please tell me I have healing items. No more beep boop.
Beep boop.
This is where the story introduces us to the antics of one Mr. Bloody Stupid Johnson. And we will get into more discussion on him at a later date, but the relevant part here is that Johnson's inventions tended to never work the way they seemed like they were supposed to. I made a mistake.
But they always work. Yes, like you mean like the machine that slices potatoes down in the kitchen? Oh, you mean the manicure device? That should probably sum that up pretty well. So, but Ridcully is not the type to be told that he should not do something because it's Ridcully. So, unsealed, the bathroom goes.
Hello, puppy dog.
But yes, so, Susan, having been rather firmly told, no, you're right, you should not get involved with this, promptly gets involved with this because she was told not to. At some level, you kind of have to wonder, did Death do that on accident? Because Death is, honestly, rather naive and could have actually meant to say, no, stay out of it, sincerely. But anyone who's been around humans for 5 minutes knows, okay, do not touch the box. I'm stepping out of my classroom for 30 seconds. That box is getting touched all over.
And while the book is never explicit, there are some conversations between Death and Albert later that very strongly imply, no, he did that on purpose because he absolutely knew it would get Susan involved. Because Susan can go places and do things that Death can't. And Death knows this, and he knows that it's his way to get around the Arbiters, because he knows that the Arbiters are up to something, and that they know he can't intervene directly. Oh, finally a better move than confusion.
Anyway, Susan gets on the trail when she looks into the disappearance of a freelance tooth fairy. Because it is just a contract job here. They give you the flyers and tell you where to go pick up the teeth.
And where to drop off the money.
Yep. Anyway, she has gone missing. Her name is Violet. And Susan kind of sees her sometimes at the bar where you can go if you're clearly not normal.
So, this story is something of a mystery story. There is something clearly going on, and Susan is trying to piece the pieces together. She goes looking for Violet, finds her apartment, I think?
Yep.
And remind me what she finds there. My brain is blanking.
She doesn't really find much useful, but she does find someone there who's wondering why Violet is behind on paying her dues of tooth money, and happens to mention that the guy who usually does the drop-offs has also gone missing. So he just starts ranting about how it's making his life more difficult. But this is where we need to rewind to the other narrative with the assassins. Tea Time has put together a small group of ne'er-do-wells, some of whom are just in debt and need the money desperately, some of whom are just along for the ride, one of whom is effectively a gigantic child. Like, just mind of a child.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
they
Banjo.
have... Yep. Kazooie.
No.
But yeah, so what they are responsible. They are behind Violet's disappearance and the death of the carriage driver because they needed both of them to get into a certain place, which we'll get into later. So Susan is on their trail. During all this, Death is still playing Hogfather, including making appearances at a department store.
Much to the chagrin of the department store owner.
Yeah, because one of the major themes that we'll talk about later in more depth is the sanitization of holiday traditions, such as if that sleigh pulled by gigantic boars actually landed, they would not be cutesy little pigs. They would be angry, basically predators. And more than willing to, as all the kids are quick to point out, do a wee. Every single child who sits on Death's bony skeletal Santa lap first says, "Your pig did a wee," before they say what they want for Christmas. It gets to the point where the manager tries to get the watchman, including Nobby, to arrest him. Nobby, who has the bitterness of being forgotten too many Christmases, goes up to comply until the Christmas magic takes over. He just sits on Santa's lap and gets a pretty crossbow for a present, and then says, "Yeah, well, there's nothing we can do. He's not exactly giving away your stuff, is he? So no crime being committed here. Bye."
Also, Nobby gets to sit on Death/Hogfather's lap and gets himself a nice shiny crossbow for his Hogwatch gift. So he certainly doesn't have much to complain about.
Yep. Then there's the other Christmas myths that Death plays with. Good King Wenceslas gets mercilessly ripped apart because, well, if you're forcing charity on someone, is it really charity? There's also the little match girl.
Yep. Death finds the abandoned little girl on the brink of death, of literally dying, and decides that since tonight he is not Death, he is the Hogfather. There are things the Hogfather can do that Death is not allowed to do. And he chooses to do those things by, instead of simply leaving the girl to her fate as the Reaper and taking her soul to the afterlife, he picks her up and takes her somewhere that she can be fed and clothed and kept warm.
Yep, and then they throw snowballs at the angels who were going to land to play a sad song to be inspirational to people.
So, during all this time, Susan has been trying to figure out what's going on. She has made a few other questions of some people. She has visited the Unseen University to make a few questions of the wizards, who are having their own issues that we'll double back to here in a second. And, these unusual incidents and the information she has been able to dig up have convinced her that she needs to go have a look at Death's actual abode. Death has a quote-unquote house in a place that is not really a place. It's sort of its own little pocket space in reality. And Susan, being who she is able to visit by calling upon Death's steed, the horse Binky, who looks like a perfectly normal horse and behaves like a perfectly normal horse, except he is essentially invulnerable and immortal and all that other fun stuff. There, Susan, with the help of Quoth and the Death of Rats, finds a hidden room in Death's storehouse of the hourglasses that measure the remaining lifespan of every being in reality. And this room is full of the hourglasses associated with various gods and other fantastical beings. And given the nature of these entities, all of these hourglasses are built in unusual, impossible ways that can't actually run out of sand. So you have them built like Klein bottles and other impossible shapes where the sand just continually flows rather than eventually draining all down into one spot. And here she finds the hourglass of the Hogfather smashed on the ground. It's sand spilled all over the floor, except for a very small bit that still remains within the shattered remains of the hourglass. Susan takes Death's sword at this point, which is a second weapon he has for the Reaping of Souls, because of something about a scythe being the weapon of the item of a commoner, and therefore not fit for the use of the Reaping of Souls of, say, royalty. But for that same reason, and since royalty is kind of a thing that's on decline, it doesn't really get used much, so Susan borrows it. Meanwhile, as I said, there's stuff going on with the wizards. You want to take this one from here?
Sure. So, the absence of the Hogfather has, as will be explained in the story soon enough, created a vacuum and an excess of belief, which means every time Ridcully, or usually Ridcully but one of the other wizards, mentions, what about this thing that creates thing? I thought that existed when I was a kid, it becomes real, such as the Veruca gnome, who gives you warts, the happiness fairy, or cheerful fairy, questioning if there's a god of wine, is there a god of hangovers?
No, it's the god of hangovers.
Yes, but that's what they ask that, and yeah, he is the god of hangovers, because obviously if you've ever had one, you go, oh god. So, yeah, the wizards again are the epitome of high-int, low-whiz, because they absolutely should not be saying these things over and over again, but they keep doing it. And, yeah. Susan eventually comes to them just to see if they know anything, because there is some hint that wizardry is involved, because one of the thugs, along with Tea Time, is a low-level wizard. I think he's a student.
Yep. A student who desperately needs to pay his, various fees and expenses, which I believe at some point he mentions also include gambling debts?
Probably. So yeah, she ends up there, meets the god of hangovers, and, well...
That happens later. When she departs the wizards, and they don't really have the answers that she needs, she takes Binky, and since Binky can travel anywhere that, regardless whether it's inside of normal reality or not, she has Binky take her to the Bone Castle of the Hogfather. And she finds it empty and falling apart. And just before it completely crumbles to dust and powder so fine that it may as well have never existed, and leaves the landscape completely devoid of any sign that anything other than natural landscape was ever there, she finds the god of hangovers, Bilius, lying in the middle of the collapsing building and manages to rescue him. She then returns to the wizards to get an answer for why he's there. And this is where the wizards finally put 2 and 2 together and realize what they've been doing. As, with the help of Hex, and with Ridcully actually meeting the Veruca gnome, and the wizards starting to identify the source of this weird noise that keeps showing up, start piecing together what's going on, at least in the sense of realizing there is a surplus of belief and it is causing the manifestation of all of these entities.
Yep. one of the first things they do that actually helps is mix every hangover cure they can think of together, give it to Bilious, the god of hangovers, which he gets none of the effects of the hangover cures. Those go to Bibulus, the god of wine, and he is so happy to turn the tables for once. But this leaves him clear-headed enough to actually help Susan as she continues tracking down what remains of the Hogfather. Which brings her into the Tooth Fairy's domain. So, this is when we actually start figuring out what Tea Time's plan was. He needed to go to the Tooth Fairy's country because that's where all the children's teeth are.
All the children of generations upon generations upon generations.
And, as is mentioned fairly early in the story, getting a piece of someone is old magic. That is basically older than basically anything else. So, get a piece of everyone who's ever existed, and do a ritual to make sure that they never believed in the Hogfather. He gone. Because the gods and all these powerful beings in the Discworld rely on that belief to exist. So the way to kill the Hogfather is to make sure that no one believes he ever existed. And then track down that myth and get rid of the myth.
And this has been what Tea Time has done. He has broken into the Tower of the Tooth Fairy, killed all of the Tooth Fairy's servants and guards and messengers, and this is how Death realized something was going on, by the way, and I'll get back to that in a second. Tea Time has killed all these people, cleared out the tower, broken open the containers in all of the many, many rooms, and confiscated all the teeth stored inside, piled them up in one place, and begun a ritual with the aid of the wizard he brought to start erasing the belief of the Hogfather from everyone's mind. And it's slowly starting to work, and siphoning all that belief away has created the surplus of belief that has been giving life to all of these other entities all night long.
And in fact, the only reason it fails is because Death figures it out and steps in to create enough doubt that, look, they're sit by the fireplace. He must have come down the chimney. They took the sherry. So, yeah, there will be some proof that the Hogfather is there. It's not enough long term, but enough for the night.
Yep.
Which is all it really needs. Because he's hoping that Susan, as she does, will solve the problem.
And the reason Death was able to figure much of this out is because the Tooth Fairy's domain is a child's place. And to children, death does not exist in the same way it does for adults. It's reflected in the language we use when we talk about death, especially with very young children.
And this is actually shown when the fighting goes down in the Tooth Fairy's country. Because Tea Time's hired thugs, when they are defeated, they don't die. They just go away. They do actually die, but they go back to the real world to manifest as dead.
Yep.
Because when you talk to children, oh, he's gone now.
Yep, he went away. And this is what happened to the guards and the messengers of the Tooth Fairy as well. And when they died and were removed from the reality of the Tooth Fairy, they were sent back to random locations in the regular parts of the Discworld where Death found them.
So we'll get into why that's going to be a problem in just a moment. Because after all of the assassins are taken care of for the moment, Susan discovers who the Tooth Fairy is. The first boogeyman. Because, well, old gods do new jobs. The boogeyman came to care about the children that he was scaring and wanted to keep them safe, so he took the teeth away from the real world so magicians couldn't get their hands on them to do exactly what Tea Time was doing. But in scaring off the assassins, he used up the last of his power and fades away, leaving Banjo to step in because he is child-minded enough that he can do the job as long as someone lets him figure out what to do.
And it's interesting, and we see, even before the Tooth Fairy's nature is revealed, how Tea Time's thugs are picked off, one by one, by their own childhood fears. They're not defeated, with a couple of exceptions, by Susan, or Bilious, or the Tooth Fairy, that Violet, that she rescues. They're mostly defeated by their own childhood fears, manifested to life by the boogeyman's power in the tower.
And because it is a child's place, their fear takes over their adult brains, reverting them to children while they're facing it. Which leads to a glorious exchange between Tea Time and Susan. Like, I'm just in touch with my inner child. Hello, inner child. I'm the inner babysitter.
Yep. Susan actually comes face to face with one of these childhood monsters, the Scissor Man, which...
Who knows her, and he backs off because he doesn't want to get hit with the poker.
Yeah. The Scissor Man is the childhood... is a monster created of the childhood threat of stop sucking your thumb or the Scissor Man will come and cut it off. Susan first tells the Scissor Man, which manifests as basically a 9-foot-tall ostrich made of razor blades, which admittedly is a pretty freaky image. First she tells it, I'm not the one you're looking for, you're not my childhood fear. And when that isn't enough to get it to back off, she reminds it that, we've met before, do you want me to get the poker? And it leaves. To go hunt down the person that... Why did I leave? To hunt down the person that it was actually there for. And we get various bits from the different bandits as to their own personal boogeymen all coming to life around them and essentially scaring them to death. So as a result of all of this, it eventually comes down to Susan fighting with Tea Time, and in the scuffle, Tea Time is thrown off of a balcony and crashes down into the ground far below and essentially dies. And because he dies in the Tooth Fairy's world, the world of childhood limitations, he vanishes.
And reappears in the Unseen University, where the wizards promptly resuscitate him.
Yep.
Good job, guys!
Yep, they don't know who he is. He's just this guy who happened to fall out of the ceiling, mostly dead, just a little bit alive, in the words of The Princess Bride.
Yep. And he goes off to Susan's place of work to basically hold the children as hostages. This does not work.
Yep. Death shows up.
He tries to convince the kids that Death is scary, and they're like, he's eating a biscuit. So a skeleton sitting in a chair chewing on a cookie is not scary.
Especially since Susan is holding the poker at this time, and therefore to the children, she is the scariest thing in the room, even compared to Tea Time.
Yep. I also do like that she notes that when Tea Time loses them immediately because he tries to be all cutesy-wootsy with them. She's like, if he called them little bastards, they would have been on his side immediately. But, Tea Time makes threats, Death is between him and Susan. Susan throws the poker. It goes through Death and goes and sticks in Tea Time because it only kills monsters.
Yep. At which point, Death and Susan reconcile. Death gives her basically a Christmas card.
But they still have to go save the Hogfather.
Yep, and then tells her the job's not done. Before telling Mr. Tiataime, "You got it right!" that it's time for him to go. Susan is transported on Pinky, along with Death, out into the wilderness where she spots the original form of the Hogfather, a giant boar being pursued by hunting dogs to be a sacrifice to bring back the sun after the long cold winter. The hunting dogs in this case are more than just hunting dogs, they are manifestations of the Arbiters of Reality, making one last-ditch attempt to destroy the Hogfather forever by getting involved personally.
Susan, at Death's behest, rides the Hogfather to safety and defends him against the wolves for just long enough for the sun to rise. At which point, the wolves, now mortal, have broken the rules, and since they are mortal, they can be reaped by Death. He doesn't kill them, they just are suddenly there one minute, and then they're not. At which point, Susan watches a very rapid evolution of belief as the Hogfather cycles through various incarnations up to his present day. And then the job is done. But she doesn't really understand the stakes, because what would have happened if I hadn't saved him?
And this is where we get one of the most impactful parts of the story, and we will be going into much more detail on this later.
But essentially, the sun would not have risen, because you need to believe in things for it to be the sun rather than just a glowing orb. And according to Death, fantasy is what makes us human. So of course it was very important to save the Hogfather, because that sort of belief is what makes us what we are.
It is what separates humans from the rest of existence as... It makes humans human.
Yep, and we'll get into that much more later, because it is, bar none, my favorite Pratchett passage. And that's really the main strokes of the story, other than, Ridcully finally figures out why the bathroom had been marked off limits, and ours are marked off limits again. And the caretaker, knowing he works with wizards, makes sure to leave the door sealed, but easily unsealed for when it inevitably has to be unsealed again, when people fail to learn the lessons. So, yeah, that's Hogfather.
Yep. And there is so much of this to say that we had to compress just to get a pure, straightforward, if slightly windy and having to double back several times because we skipped over something important.
That's what happens when you write like Pratchett and you have A plot, B plot, C plot, D plot that all intersect with each other. It's gonna happen.
And we didn't even get into the footnotes.
Yep, but we will get into more things next time.
Yep.
Later.
See y'all then.